12 Oddly Useful Amish Soil Tricks That Outgrow Compost. Hello friends, welcome back to Evergreen Seniors. Have you ever driven past a quiet country farm and noticed soil so dark it looked like chocolate cake? Crops standing tall in the heat of July, no sprinklers running, no plastic bags of fertilizer in sight. And you quietly wondered, what do they know that I don't? As we grow older, we begin to understand something important. The loudest solutions are rarely the wisest ones. We've been told that gardening must mean heavy lifting, turning piles of compost, buying expensive amendments, and worrying every season. But there is another way, a quieter way. A way that sustained families through the Great Depression, through wars, through decades of uncertainty. Today, we are stepping away from the noise of modern agriculture and into the steady wisdom of the Amish. We are going to explore 12 oddly useful soil tricks that don't just support composting, they outgrow it. Most of us were taught that the compost pile is the heart of the garden. But what if the pile is actually the slow way? What if the best place for decomposition isn't in a bin at the corner of your yard, but directly under your feet? In this series, you'll learn how to bury your problems, literally. Why cleaning your garden too perfectly may be harming it. How winter can become your most powerful soil-building season. And why some of the plants you call weeds might actually be your hardest-working helpers. So pour yourself a cup of coffee or tea, settle into your chair. Let's rediscover soil wisdom that is simple, practical, and deeply freeing. Let's learn how to let nature do the heavy lifting, so your garden can care for you instead of the other way around. Part 1. The Underground Revolution. Let's begin with a season most people associate with the garden's death: winter. When frost hardens the ground and the beds look asleep, we assume the year is over. We picture microbes shutting down, worms disappearing, and soil life pressing pause until spring. But the Amish learned something generations before store-bought activators ever existed. Healthy soil does not stop working in winter. It doesn't need blazing heat to stay alive. It needs two simple things: shelter and food. And once you understand that, winter stops being an ending. It becomes a hidden workshop. Trick 1. The Amish rot, keeping soil alive in winter. Instead of leaving compost in a pile exposed to freezing wind, the Amish move the entire process where it belongs, into the bed itself. They dig a trench right in the garden, about 12 to 18 inches deep, and they fill it with a simple mix: carbon-rich leaves and nitrogen-rich kitchen scraps. Then comes the quiet detail that makes this work. They cap it with a mound of soil mixed with a small amount of wood ash. That cap acts like a thermal blanket. Down below, the organic matter begins to break down and gives off a gentle warmth. Above ground, everything looks frozen and still. But under that soil lid, life gathers. Worms drift toward the warmer zone. Microbes and fungi get to work in the dark, protected from the harshest cold. And by the time spring arrives, you don't have a trench of waste. You have dark, spongy humus, exactly where roots will reach first. No hauling wheelbarrows, no heavy lifting when your back is already tired from winter. The compost is already in place. It's a slow burn method that turns winter dormancy into preservation and preparation. Trick 2. Trench composting, the zero-waste cafeteria. From there, the Amish take the same idea and use it year-round. It's trench composting, what some people call subterranean humification. But the concept is simple: bury scraps where plants are already growing. Most of us were taught to carry scraps to a bin, turn a pile, monitor temperature, and wait. That's a lot of labor for a system many people don't stick with. The Amish skip the middleman. When a carrot gets peeled or lettuce gets trimmed, those scraps head outside. No smelly container in the kitchen, no complicated routine. Just a small hole or trench between rows, scraps dropped in, and soil placed back on top. What you've done is create an underground cafeteria for earthworms and soil biology. Burying scraps 12 to 18 inches deep feeds soil life right where plant roots will eventually travel. In a bin, nutrients can leach away, or the process becomes something you forget about. Underground, the soil holds moisture like a sponge as the scraps break down, and that moisture stays close to the root zone. This is why trench composting often makes a garden more resilient during hot, dry stretches. It's efficient in a way that feels almost unfair. No turning, no hauling, no smell, no pests hovering around an exposed pile. The best compost system is the one you actually use every day without it feeling like work, and that's exactly what this becomes. Trick 3. The no-step rule. Preserving the breath of the soil. Now we come to a mistake that quietly ruins more gardens than people realize: stepping on the beds. The Amish treat the growing space like sacred ground. Their beds are usually narrow, about 3 to 4 feet wide, with firm walking paths beside them. That way, they never have to step where the plants grow. This matters because compaction is the silent killer of soil. Think of soil like a lung. Healthy soil isn't solid. It's full of pore space, pockets that hold air and water. When you step on a bed, even once, you crush those pores. You squeeze out oxygen. You suffocate the microbes. Roots hit a wall, stay shallow and weak, and water stops soaking in the way it should. It runs off instead, as if the soil has become a roof instead of a sponge. But when you commit to permanent paths, the bed stays loose and breathable. The soil structure remains fluffy and crumbly. You don't need to fight it with constant tilling or double digging because you never strangled it in the first place. You simply pull aside mulch and plant. And that's the quiet genius of this trick. It saves your back because you're no longer battling hard ground. And it saves your garden because roots can travel deep. If you want a garden that thrives, stop walking on its throat. Part 2. The Lost Art of Feeding the Earth. There's a quiet misunderstanding in modern gardening that costs us more energy than we realize. We act as if our job is to fight the wildness, pull it, bag it, haul it away, and then replace what we removed with something we purchase. But the Amish see that as backwards. Why would you pay money and spend your strength exporting your own soil fertility? This is where the lost art begins. Feeding the earth is not about adding more products. It's about keeping what you already have, returning it to the ground, and letting life below the surface do what it was designed to do. Trick 4. The Chop and Drop, Nature's Recycling Program. Friends, I want you to look at weeds differently. Not every weed is a villain. When an Amish gardener sees a non-invasive weed, they don't yank it out by the roots like they're ripping out an enemy. They cut it at the base and let it fall right where it stood. To modern eyes, it can look messy. We like clean rows and bare dirt. But bare soil is dying soil. In the forest, nobody rakes the ground smooth. Leaves fall, they rot, and they feed the trees. Quietly, endlessly, without anyone managing it. When you chop and drop, two powerful things happen. First, the roots left behind die and decay underground, creating tiny tunnels for air and water. It's a free aeration system built by nature itself. Second, the green tops become instant mulch. They shade the soil, hold moisture, cool the root zone in summer, and as they break down, they release nitrogen and minerals back into the bed. During the Victory Gardens era in 1943, gardeners who kept green material on site often saw far better results than those who removed it, because the soil stayed fed and protected. This isn't laziness, it's observation. It's learning to let the garden recycle its own strength. So put away the trash bags. Let the garden feed itself. Trick 5. The pinch of ash. The fireplace secret. Now, if you have a wood stove or a fireplace, you may be sitting on a small fortune, but only if you treat it with respect. The Amish call it a pinch for a reason. Wood ash is concentrated minerals, calcium, potassium, magnesium. The final gift a tree leaves behind. But the Amish also live by an old truth. The dose makes the poison. Too much ash can do real damage, because ash is strongly alkaline. Dumping buckets onto a bed is like dumping salt into soup. A pinch improves it. A bucket ruins it. So the Amish sprinkle cool, dry ash lightly, like dusting a cake with powdered sugar. Never in piles, never as bulk filler. Used correctly, especially on acidic soil, ash can act as a fast liming agent and reduce the need for store-bought lime. It can support healthier, stronger tomato growth and better fruit. But they're careful. They avoid using it around potatoes, which dislike alkaline conditions, and they keep it away from acid-loving berries. And they never rush it. They let ash sit for days so hidden embers can't start a fire. It's a resource, yes, but one that demands restraint. Trick 6. The living nitrogen. Planting beans just to kill them. This next trick can feel almost painful the first time you hear it, because it asks you to plant something and then refuse the harvest. But what you give up in one bowl of beans, you gain back in years of soil strength. The Amish understand that beans and peas are more than food. They are medicine for exhausted ground. These plants are nitrogen fixers. They pull nitrogen from the air and store it in their roots, in small nodules you can sometimes see when you pull a plant up. Here's the Amish move. You plant beans in your poorest bed. You let them grow. You let them flower. And then, just as the pods begin to form, you cut the plants down. You leave the roots in place. As those roots break down, the stored nitrogen releases into the soil for whatever you plant next. Most gardeners wait for the harvest. But once the plant commits to making beans, it spends that stored nitrogen. By cutting it early, you keep the nitrogen underground where your future crops can use it. It's rebuilding the land from the inside out. And it carries a lesson that feels made for this stage of life. It says, I care more about what this soil will be next year than what I can take from it today. That is not loss. That is wisdom. Because the following season, when you plant corn or tomatoes in that spot, you'll see it. Leaves that are deeper green. Growth that looks steadier. A bed that feels more alive, like it finally remembered what it was capable of. Part 3. The invisible workforce. If you've ever looked down at your garden and felt discouraged, soil that seems gray, dusty, stubborn, and lifeless, then you already know the hard truth. You can buy expensive fertilizers, but they won't bring soil back to life. Fertilizer feeds plants for a moment. What you need is biology. You need an invisible workforce. And this is where Amish wisdom gets quietly dramatic, because instead of purchasing life in a bag, they go straight to the oldest living laboratory on Earth. Trick 7. The forest soil inoculation. Importing the ancients. The Amish understand that the strongest, most resilient microbes don't live in garden centers. They live in old woods. In healthy forests, especially those with older trees, the soil has survived droughts, floods, deep freezes, and long summers for thousands of years. Those organisms are survivors. They know how to hold water. They know how to unlock nutrients. They know how to keep plants standing when conditions turn harsh. The trick is simple and almost humbling. You go to a healthy forest. You scrape aside the dry leaves on the surface, and underneath you'll find it. Dark, crumbly, sweet-smelling earth. You take only a handful or two, then you bring that handful home. You mix it into your compost tea or sprinkle it lightly into your beds. And here's the key idea. You are not transplanting dirt. You are transplanting a civilization. Diverse bacteria and fungi that store-bought mixes can't truly match. Those indigenous microorganisms multiply, they spread, they colonize your soil. And suddenly your plants are connected to a deeper network of nutrients you didn't even know existed. It's like giving your garden an immune system transplant from the strongest patient on earth. Trick 8. The seedling nursery. Treating babies like babies. Now let's talk about seedlings, because most of us treat them like miniature adults. We set them in the ground, pat the soil, and hope for the best. The Amish don't. They treat seedlings like what they are, babies. The first 24 to 48 hours after transplanting often decides whether a seedling becomes strong or spends the rest of its life struggling. Amish gardeners don't drop rough, heavy mulch right up against a delicate stem. Instead, they create a small nursery zone at the base. They might use finer soil or wood shavings around the stem, and they protect the seedling from harsh sun on that first day. But the real secret sounds almost wrong until you see it work. The haircut. If a seedling is tall and leggy, they snip off the top third, not to punish it, but to redirect it. That gentle shock pushes energy down into the roots. And the Amish know something modern gardening forgets. Roots matter more than shoots. A short, stocky plant with a deep root system survives drought. A tall, weak plant folds the moment stress arrives. They water deeply, but less often, training roots to dive down and search for moisture. They're not raising pampered plants. They're raising resilient ones. Trick 9. Liquid biology. The manure tea. We've talked about dry fertility, but the Amish also use what you might call liquid gold, manure tea or compost tea. Not the bright blue chemical mix. This is living biology in water. They use it for biopriming. Sometimes they soak seeds in a mild manure tea before planting. Other times, they brew tea from finished compost and spray it onto the leaves. And the reason is bigger than nutrients. It's protection. When leaves are coated in beneficial microbes, harmful diseases, blights, mildews, and infections have fewer places to land and take hold. The good life crowds out the bad. It's like a probiotic drink for the garden. It strengthens the system without a single drop of fungicide. And it turns the surface of each leaf into something quietly powerful, like a living fortress. Part 4. The wisdom of rest and timing. There was a kind of gardening wisdom that doesn't look impressive from the outside. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't come in a bag. It doesn't shout. But it changes everything. Because it respects a truth modern life keeps trying to erase. Timing matters. Rest matters. And the soil, just like the human body, responds to patience far better than it responds to pressure. Trick 10. Fall manure. Letting winter do the work. If you put fresh manure on a garden in the spring, you're gambling with your entire season. Too much nitrogen and salt can burn tender roots. There's the risk of harmful bacteria like E. coli. And the smell, well, it can turn neighbors into enemies overnight. The Amish avoid that trap with one simple decision. They spread manure in the fall. They lay it on empty beds just before winter sets in. when harvest is finished and the land looks bare. And the reason is almost poetic. Winter becomes the worker. Freezing and thawing breaks the manure down. Rain leaches excess salts. Ammonia dissipates into the air. What was hot and risky becomes mellow and usable. By the time spring arrives, that manure has transformed into balanced, rich earth. It has fed soil organisms quietly all winter long, and the bed is ready, without the drama, without the burn, without the springtime panic. It's a lesson in patience. Do the work when the rush is over, so the soil is ready when the sun returns. Trick 11. The sabbatical, the 7th year rest. This next trick may be the hardest one for modern Americans to accept, because we've been trained to believe that more is always better. More harvest, more productivity, more output, faster, now. But the Amish, following an old biblical tradition, practice the sabbatical year, sometimes called Shemitah. Every 7th year, they let the land rest. They do not sow. They do not prune. They let it lie fallow. To a commercial farmer, that can look like losing money. To the soil, it is a life-saving vacation. During rest, the ground replenishes nutrients. Pest cycles break because their favorite crops aren't there. Deep-rooted plants rise up and pull minerals from the low, bringing them back toward the surface where future crops can use them. And here is the promise carried through generations. The years after a true rest often repay what was lost. The soil comes back stronger. The harvest returns steadier. The land feels rejuvenated. And you don't need a huge farm to apply this idea. You can do it on a small scale. Rotate your beds. Give one bed a year off. Plant a cover crop and simply let it be. When you bring that bed back into production, you may be shocked by how alive it feels, how willing it is to grow again. It's also a reminder that nothing in nature runs at 100% forever. Not the soil, and not us. Trick 12. Seed saving, the ultimate adaptation. And now we reach the trick that outgrows everything else, because it doesn't just feed this season, it protects the future. Seed saving. When you buy seeds from a catalog, you're buying genetics that succeeded somewhere else. Maybe a greenhouse in Ohio or a field in Oregon. But those seeds don't know your backyard. They don't know your rain patterns, your pests, your heat waves, your soil. The Amish save their own seeds, but they don't save them randomly. They save seeds from the strongest plants, the ones that survived drought, the ones insects ignored, the ones that stood firm when the season turned harsh. Over years, this creates something powerful, a land race, a local strain shaped by your exact conditions. These seeds remember. They carry the code for surviving your specific challenges because they were born inside them. And this is how you begin to outgrow the need for constant inputs. Instead of endlessly correcting problems with fertilizers and pesticides, you breed plants that need less rescuing. You build independence. You keep the future of your food in a simple glass jar on a shelf. In the end, this may be the most practical inheritance anyone can pass on. Not just seeds, but a quiet kind of freedom. Conclusion. The quiet power of Amish soil wisdom. The Amish soil tricks aren't magic. They're relationships. They're the understanding that soil is not a factory floor. It's a living community that responds to care, timing, and respect. Today, we walked through the Amish rot that keeps the earth working through winter, and trench composting that feeds soil life right where roots will grow. We looked at chop and drop, turning weeds into mulch and nourishment instead of trash. We learned the no-step rule, walking on paths so the soil can breathe. We explored the pinch of ash, used with restraint, and the living nitrogen of beans planted not for harvest, but for healing the land. And we ended with the wisdom of fall manure, the courage to let a bed rest, and the quiet strength of seed saving. All of these methods ask for the same thing: patience, a slower pace. And maybe that's exactly what we need, too. Because as we age, we don't always want to double dig every spring or haul heavy bags from the store. And the good news is, we don't have to. We can let worms do the digging. We can let cover crops do the feeding. We can let winter do the composting. We can build a garden that starts to care for itself, so it can care for us. So here's my challenge. Try just one of these tricks this season. Take a handful of healthy forest soil and introduce it to your bed. Or stop stepping on the growing space. Or save seeds from the strongest tomato you grow this year. Then watch what happens when you stop fighting nature and start working with her. Thank you for spending this time with me on Evergreen Seniors. If something in today's video felt useful, please tap like. It truly helps our community grow. And tell me in the comments, which Amish soil trick will you try first? Until next time, keep your hands in the dirt and your heart in the sun. Goodbye, friends.